Good evening and welcome to the November 5th Bloomington Planning Commission meeting. The Planning Commission advises the City Council on development proposals, development standards, and long-range planning and transportation issues. Some items the Planning Commission has final decision authority, and others the City Council will make the final decision. Planning Commission is made up of 7 volunteer members that are appointed by the City Council and serve up to 3-year terms. At this point, we have 5 members in attendance, and therefore we have a quorum, and we'll move forward. Tonight, we have 5 items on the agenda, but before we start, let's rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. All right. Mr. Markergaard, would you go through the protocol for tonight, please?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, given the pandemic, this is our 14th remote meeting. We have just 2 people here in the council chambers, yourself and me. All the planning commissioners, applicants, and other staff members are remote, joining via WebEx. We can take testimony at any time during the meeting. Just call in and we will provide instructions. You can join via computer or via phone. The number to call is 952-563-8926. Or if you prefer, you can email planning@bloomingtonmn.gov. And we will have this information scrolling across the screen throughout the meeting this evening. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. Tonight, our first item is a consideration for the Planning Commission on a tax increment financing district for the Lindale Flats area. Cherry Shoquist, could you give us a staff report, please?
Thank you, Chair Solberg. Commissioners, I am about to share my screen with the presentation.
Yes, we can see it.
Thank you. So before you tonight is the Lindale Flats tax increment financing project area. This project may be familiar to you. You already approved this project last September. It was the first project that came to you under the city's Opportunity Housing Ordinance for affordable housing. It's located at 9320 Lindale Avenue South, and it's 1.755 acres. And you can see the location here at the corner of Lindale and 94th Street. It's a $20 million high-density multifamily rental development with 81 affordable housing units at 60% of area median income. They will remain affordable for a period of 30 years. The development will be 4 stories with a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units with plenty of amenities. Its location is on a transit corridor in the Gateway District, and construction will start in spring of 2021. So I know that this commission is very familiar with tax increment financing to capture tax-based growth resulting from new development, and in this case, for improvements of affordable housing. The Planning Commission is responsible for a finding of consistency with the general development plans of the city as a whole. And among the many statutory findings to approve a TIF district, the Planning Commission has that one goal of finding that the TIF plan conforms to the plans for development of the city. This project provides a range of housing choices and will provide affordable housing to serve local demand. The calendar of events is slightly different tonight than the presentation and the report you received in your commission packet. Some of the dates have been set back a cycle, but it's important to note that if the TIF comprehensive plan approval is approved tonight, parts of the project will be going to the November 9th and 10th City Council and HRA meeting. And once the TIF is approved by the HRA on November 10th, it will be going to the City Council on November 23rd. The development agreement and final documents to be approved by the HRA on the 24th. And the land sale and finance closing at the end of November, mid-December, will get us to the state bond closing deadline by December 31st of this year. And the recommendation is before you. I'd be happy to take any questions. And Michaela Hewitt, our municipal advisor from Baker Tilly, is on the line if there's any questions for her as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you for the staff report. Planning Commission members, are there any questions for Sherry Showquist? Commissioner Goldsman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. One question I had is 100% of the units in this development projected to be affordable, or is it a mix of both affordable and market rate?
Thank you, Chair Solberg, Commissioner Goldsman. All 81 units will be affordable at 60% AMI of area median income.
Thank you.
All right. Any additional questions by commission members? Otherwise, I'll remind you that tonight, this is, as part of our charge, this is not a public hearing. It is simply a matter of the Planning Commission having discussion and making a recommendation one way or the other for the resolution to the City Council. Any other discussion, questions for staff?
Mr. Chair, this is Swato. I apologize. I don't know how to raise my hand yet.
Okay, go ahead.
Just a question for staff. I'm not familiar with this project. I think I just as a new member to the commission. Is there a reason why? I know I was reading the report on the staff report here. It says at least 20% of the units are occupied by individuals whose income is 50% or less of the area median income. Does that also, just for my own clarity, I guess, does that also mean like 30% AMI individual or family member could also occupy the units?
Thank you, Chair Solberg, Commissioner Abdi. I appreciate your question. So when affordable housing tax increment financing is made available, there are two options. One is for 20% of the units to be affordable at the 50% of area median income level. The other is for 40% of the units to be affordable at the 60% AMI, area median income level. And that is simply to qualify for the tax increment financing. It is our goal in the city of Bloomington to provide as many 30% of area median income units as possible. However, the resources and funding available for those units is difficult to identify. Lyndale Flats, the developer, MWF, will be providing 100% of the units affordable to the 60% area median income, but are agreeable to renting to Section 8 tenants that have those resources. And also, if the city, through our Affordable Housing Trust Fund or any other new and innovative financing tools we're able to bring to the development, the developer would be willing to utilize any of those yet to be identified resources to provide 30% AMI units within the development. That is standard for us to negotiate within our development agreements under the Opportunity Housing Ordinance, knowing that at this point in time, we may not have all of the 30% AMI resources available that we would like, but knowing that the developers would be willing to pursue that with us in the future when we do have those resources. So I hope that answers your question. I'd be happy to take any follow-up questions.
Commissioner Abdi, any additional?
Mr. Chair, that was adequate. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. All right, any other commissioners with questions for Sherry Shoquist? All right, at this point, if we go ahead, any discussion on this at this point from Planning Commission members? I guess I can start. Just as this falls under our purview of consistency with general development plans, I believe, again, the providing housing for all types of users in the city and providing affordable housing are two of our larger initiatives for sure. So I am confident that I can support the application as is in front of us, or the tax increment financing district and the findings that need to be made. Commissioner Goldsman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I would echo your comments, as well as driving by that property for many years. It's been vacant or empty since the demolishment of the bowling alley that was once there. So I'm in support of the financing, tax increment financing, really to support development in this property that's been vacant for coming up on 10 years, if my memory serves me right.
Thank you. Any other discussion from commission members? Commissioner Roman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just echo agreement with others that for the scope of what the commission has asked to weigh in on, I do find this to be in alignment.
Thank you. All right. Any additional comments from commission members? Otherwise, I would entertain a motion or a recommendation. Commissioner Roman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to adopt the resolution as attached to the staff report concerning the Lindale Flats redevelopment project and tax increment financing district proposal of the City of Bloomington and the Bloomington Housing and Redevelopment Authority, and find that the plans are consistent with the comprehensive plan for the City of Bloomington.
Thank you, Commissioner Roman. We have a motion. Is there a second? Commissioner Cookton?
Second.
All right. We have a motion and a second in front of us. All those in favor say aye by roll call. Commissioner Goldsman.
Aye.
Commissioner Corman.
Aye.
Commissioner Roman.
Aye.
Commissioner Abdi.
Aye.
Commissioner Cookton.
Aye.
And I for myself. That resolution moves forward, as indicated earlier, to the, I still have it on here, November 9th. Is that correct? I think, yeah.
That's
okay.
correct.
All right. Thank you, Sherry Shoquist, for that. We will now move on to item number 2, a conditional use permit for TLC Learning Center. Liz O'Day, you have the staff report for us.
Yes, I do. Let's see. Can you guys see my screen?
We can, yep.
Good. All right, so item 1 on your, or no, not item 1, item 2 on your agenda tonight is for a daycare enrollment increase. Transfiguration Lutheran Church is located at 11,000 France Avenue. It is surrounded by single-family homes. The daycare TLC Learning Center has operated inside the church since the mid-1980s through various temporary conditional use permit approvals. They received their permanent COP back in 2007 for up to 75 students. The increase to 90 students is to provide care for preschoolers and school-age children, for distance learning assistance and part-time care. Their hours of operation are 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday to Friday. Here is their floor plan. Sorry, there's a lot going on the screen, but basically the daycare would primarily use the education wing of the church, which is circled in red, the top left corner of the screen. And then they have additional classroom space in the basement as well. They would occasionally use the large fellowship hall and sanctuary for activities. Also to note, they use the northeast corner of the building for pickup and drop-offs, and it also provides direct access to the play area that's there. Just a couple notes on miscellaneous things. Parking is compliant, however, it's right on the cusp of the requirements, so it should be noted that any additional children that they want to add in the future should be reviewed for parking compliance. Similar to other uses and places of assembly, we are recommending a non-concurrent use condition, limiting the full occupancy of both the daycare and sanctuary at one time. That's pretty typical of these uses in places of assembly. We did do a landscaping count, and they are missing 8 trees, and they must provide a plan showing where they're going to plant those 8 trees, as well as a species of those prior to increasing up to 90 students. Because there are no building permit required for this. Lastly, lighting upgrades, it's not required at this time. I did not receive any correspondence on this item, and I am unaware of any complaints or concerns with this use. And it is a final decision by the Planning Commission, and I believe that the applicant should be on the call for questions if needed.
All right. Thank you, Liz O'Day. Appreciate the staff report. Planning Commission members, are there any questions for staff? Commissioner Cookton.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Ms. O'Day, is there anything in our code that stops the number at some point? We're going from 75 to 90. Is there something on the way where if they want to go to 100 or more, whatever the number is, what stops this eventually from a code standpoint?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Cookton, I would just say that they have 199 parking spaces on site, and their requirement is 198, considering full use of the sanctuary and daycare. So if they even go a little bit above 90, they need to come back in and either ask for a proof of parking or build some new parking, but they would need to come back for further review by the Planning Commission if they increase beyond 90.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Liz O'Day? All right, seeing none. Mr. Markegard, is there anybody online that wishes to applicant that wishes to speak to this?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Barb Wigstadt is here, and I will unmute you.
So I came and I visited, and now I'm in trouble for prosecuting.
Thank you for taking consideration of this. The reason why we're asking to go to 90 is because we are now providing the distance learning for the school agers who are here all day. Our numbers because of COVID in our preschool rooms are down, so we are beyond or underneath the 75 that we have currently, and we have had for decades. The only reason we're asking go to 90 is so that if we are able to raise up our preschool numbers, it won't affect our school age numbers that we have. Normally when school's in session, they're here in the morning and in the afternoon. Some are here morning only, afternoon only. It's a totally different world now with the COVID thing. So that's why we're asking to go to 90.
All right, thank you. Commission members, are there any questions for Barb Wigstead? All right, seeing none, thank you for your comments, Barb. All right, Mr. Markegard, is there anybody online that wishes to speak to this from the public?
Mr. Chairman, commissioners, nobody pre-registered, and I conferred with Mr. Pease that nobody has called in on this item.
Okay, so seeing no one from the public currently wishing to speak to this item, I would entertain a motion from Planning Commission members to close the public hearing. Commissioner Goldsman.
Motion to close the public hearing.
All right, and Commissioner Cookdon.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second in front of us to close public hearing. All those in favor say aye by roll call. Commissioner Goldsman.
Aye.
Commissioner Corman.
Aye.
Commissioner Roman.
Aye.
Commissioner Abdi.
Aye.
And Commissioner Cookton.
Aye.
And aye for myself. Motion passes. Public hearing is now closed. Is there any discussion on this item from Planning Commission members? Commissioner Cookton.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Looks like a good application to me, and I'm also happy to hear that we do have something in the code that sort of prevents it further increasing inch by inch. I always get a little hesitant when we say, oh, it's just a little bit more. And I'm glad we have something concrete that's saying, you know, what is the final limit, and we're well within that limit now. And so I'm happy to support this application.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Cookton. Is there anybody else who would wish to speak to this item? If not, I would entertain a motion. Commissioner Goldsman,
I'd make a motion.
go ahead.
All right. In case PL 2020-177, having been able to make the required findings, I move to adopt a resolution approving a conditional use permit to increase student enrollment from 75 to 90 for an existing daycare within an existing place of assembly at 11000 France Avenue South, subject to the conditions and code requirements attached to the staff report.
Thank you, Commissioner Goldsman. There is a motion to approve this conditional use permit. Is there a second? Commissioner Roman.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the conditional use permit to increase the student enrollment from 75 to 90. All those in favor say aye by roll call. Commissioner Goldsman.
Aye.
Commissioner Corman.
Aye.
Commissioner Roman.
Aye.
Commissioner Abdi.
Aye.
Commissioner Cookton.
Aye.
All right, on an aye for myself, motion passes. That's a final decision unless an appeal is received by 4:30 on November 10th. All right, and moving on to item number 3. Liz O'Day, you have a staff report for us.
Yep. So item 3 on your agenda tonight is for another conditional use permit. This one's for a health club in an existing multi-tenant building. The address is 6301 Cecilia Circle. Some of you may recognize the site. Westwood Church occupies the southern portion of the building, and they received their approvals a few years ago. The surrounding uses include a large office warehouse building to the west, I-494 to the south, and the city of Edina to the north. Beyond PT, they would provide one-on-one personal training, coaching, Pilates, wellness by appointment only. Their hours of operation are 5 a.m. to 9 p.m., 7 days a week. Their floor plan is fairly basic. It's an open floor area design with equipment kind of along the edges of the room. And then there are 2 restrooms in the back of the space. And then Westwood Church is directly sort of to the east, or not east, to the right of the screen. Parking is compliant. While 17 spaces are required for this use, we don't anticipate the user using all 17 spaces at one time based on their business model of appointment only and one-on-one training. Because there's a limited amount of parking spaces allocated for all of the northern tenant spaces, and some of the tenant spaces are vacant, we would require just additional parking review for those uses if they are higher parking requirement uses. And then the landscaping and lighting, they are compliant with Westwood Church. They came in a couple years ago and provided compliant landscaping and lighting for the entire site. And then just to touch on a piece of correspondence that I received earlier this afternoon. The staff emailed me indicating that they are possibly looking at another tenant space within the same building, just basically to the west of their proposed space. The other space is of a similar size, so there wouldn't be any change or concern from a parking standpoint. So staff is recommending that the approval tonight is for the subject tenant space that you're reviewing. And if they decide to shift to another tenant, that the planning manager can sign off on that application. This allows other departments to review their requirements and codes, and it provides flexibility in not having the applicant go through this process again. While reviewing the condition, I noted that that condition number 1 was not needed. So there is no construction proposed with this project. So I have provided a supplemental memo to the Planning Commission earlier this afternoon. So hopefully that was received, and the revised resolution is in your packet for your viewing. So we are recommending approval. I have not received any correspondence on this item. I will note that unfortunately the applicant was not able to attend the meeting tonight. So I'll do my best to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. All right. Any questions for staff on this from Planning Commission members? I have one. Just to clarify, with the revised information that was sent out earlier tonight, there is no need to make a recommendation with those revisions that you mentioned in the staff report. Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. All right. Any other commissioners have questions for Liz O'Day? Seeing none, Mr. Markegard. Knowing that we don't have the applicant online, do we have anybody from the public that wishes to speak to this?
Mr. Chairman, nobody has pre-registered, and Mr. Pease has confirmed that no one has called. There is one caller in the list, I'm just going to check in with, just in case. Stefia Scheurer-Melnick. I will unmute you now in case you want to speak to this item.
Nobody from the public. All right, Planning Commission members, seeing that nobody from the public wishes to speak to this item, I'd entertain a motion to close the public hearing. Commissioner Cookton?
Motion to close the public hearing.
All right, we have a motion in front of us. Is there a second? Commissioner Roman?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye by roll call. Commissioner Goldsman?
Aye.
Commissioner Corman?
Aye.
Commissioner Roman?
Aye.
Commissioner Abdi?
Aye.
Commissioner Cookton?
Aye.
And aye for myself. Motion passes. Public hearing is now closed. Is there any discussion on this item by any commission members? Commissioner Roman?
This one looks pretty straightforward to me, so I'll obviously see if anyone else has any comments. Otherwise, I'm happy to make a motion if not.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Roman. And I agree with you. I'm glad to see, again, some of the open space in these types of facilities be put to use. So I'm also supportive of it. Anybody else from the commission? Otherwise, Commissioner Roman, I think you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In case PL 2020-189, having been able to make the required findings, I move to adopt a resolution approving a conditional use permit for a health club at 6301 Cecilia Circle, subject to the conditions and code requirements listed in the revised resolution.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Roman. We have a motion in front of us to approve the conditional use permit for a health club in a multi-tenant building. Is there a second? Commissioner Corman.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to approve the conditional use permit for a health club in a multi-tenant building. All those in favor say aye. By roll call, Commissioner Goldsman.
Aye.
Commissioner Corman.
Aye.
Commissioner Roman.
Aye.
Commissioner Abdi.
Aye.
Commissioner Cookton.
Aye.
An aye for myself. Motion passes. That is a final decision on this item unless an appeal is received by 4:30 on November 10th. Thank you. I'm keeping you guys on your toes. I'm not allowing any time between ayes or nays here. So we are on to the fourth item. Mr. Mike Centenario, you have the staff report for us, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to share my screen now. So please let me know if you can't see it.
We can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 4 on tonight's agenda is related to a Cherrywood Point development. It's a residential care facility, assisted living, and independent living senior facility at 5501 American Boulevard West. It's something that some of the commission members may be familiar with. They went through a couple rounds of approvals over the past couple of years, but it is well under construction at this point. And I'll touch on a couple phases within this development because it is a two-phase development overall, so quite substantial. This screen is aerial image. Cherrywood Point is in the red shading. That would be phase 1. And then immediate to the west, another senior facility, but independent living, 5-story building dubbed The Point is also under construction. So there's a lot of activity going on site, and that activity led to the application that we're reviewing here. Just a plan view of the two phases. So we're talking about tonight. We're talking about a final development plan for Cherrywood Point in order to establish an accessory restaurant and a conditional use permit for that restaurant. And the reason that the final development plan entitlement is required is due to parking. So when you're looking at phase 1 and phase 2, there is each facility has more or less dedicated parking for each surface parking for each phase, namely near the primary entrance for phase 2, if you can see that kind of turnaround area. And then for phase 1, you have a parking lot to the east of the building. And then there's also some shared parking, especially along the south of the building. Each phase has its own structured parking underground, or under the first level. So it is code complying in terms of its parking supply, which, a lot of developments we see applications to reduce that to some degree, but this development is code complying in terms of its parking demand based on residential units. But the final development plan is required because the accessory restaurant, by definition, the applicant is not proposing to increase the parking supply. Essentially, they intend to use the parking that's already been planned and approved and is under construction on the site, which we feel very comfortable with, and we'll detail that. I'll detail that a little bit further. Just to refresh some folks' memory, or to provide a graphic image for those who are not familiar with the development. Again, here's the two phases. So this is the last image was just a bird's eye view, and this image is from American Boulevard, essentially looking southwest. And so phase 1, Cherrywood Point, that's the building that would have this accessory restaurant. That's on the left. And then The Point, which again is also under construction, but is not as far along, is on the right. So if you can see my cursor, this general area here where I'm moving my cursor around, that's is the kitchen area of development, or development's dining services, and would be the same kitchen that would be used for this accessory restaurant. And when I say accessory, it really just means subordinate to, or it's not the primary use of the facility. It's not the primary use of the site, but if you or I wanted to have a drink, they would be able to serve us. So it is a restaurant. This kind of zooms into that plan view again a little bit, and this red outline is something the architect provided that really identifies the restaurant area, and that includes some floor area on the first level of the Cherrywood Point development, but then it also includes an outdoor patio, and so I'll identify those different spaces momentarily. Just to touch on one of the reasons why we think the parking supply is going to be more than adequate is, when we say accessory restaurant, it would be very different from a standalone chain restaurant, for example, where you have a separate building, its own parking facilities, and its own branding. There wouldn't be any exterior signage for this restaurant. So unless you were lived in the area or were a guest of a resident, you probably wouldn't know there was even a restaurant there. It would utilize the same kitchen and the same kitchen staff, so there wouldn't be separate groups of staff for the different uses. But then it would be physically connected to the point. So I've identified this area here, which is a physical connection between phase 1 and phase 2, between the assisted living and the independent senior living. So we would suspect, and I think the applicant would like, some of the folks that live in the point, this phase 2 development, they may want to patronize this restaurant, but that wouldn't generate any additional parking demand because they'd simply just be able to walk in through that hallway into the restaurant area. Looking at the floor plan in a little more detail. So that red outline, that's where essentially what that identifies is the liquor license, where the applicant would be able to serve beer and wine. And so that's really the confines of the restaurant is dictated by where they could have service. And these are really the same spaces that would be here anyway. Your lobby area, an outdoor patio, your dining room, your kitchen, as well as some of the recreational spaces like craft rooms or some sort of more recreational spaces. That's included in here too. Those sorts of spaces typically exist in these types of facilities, and they would exist even if there wasn't a restaurant being proposed. The green here, the green versus the blue, the green area is exterior spaces. So an outdoor patio is being constructed with outdoor seating, as you'd expect. It's a landscape space with some walkways, some what I believe are some garden beds, and there's also some seating, as you would expect. And so that was included in the seat total because that would be included in the liquor license, and you would be able to be served a beer, but then you also be able to have food service in those spaces as well. So this really just identifies more the interior versus the exterior spaces of this accessory restaurant. Again, just going back to the overall site, the relationship between phase 1 and phase 2, it's code complying from a parking perspective, and we don't consider the restaurant. But given the characteristics of the restaurant, we feel it is totally appropriate for phase 1, and really would be essentially an added amenity for the residents. So they wouldn't be, they would have their more traditional food plan for the residents, but then there would be this extra alternative that wouldn't be confined to the breakfast, lunch, and dinner, as well as the alcohol service. With that, we are recommending approval of both the final development plan, which really is just allows the accessory restaurant to exist without having to construct extra parking. And then further, we are recommending approval of the conditional use permit for the restaurant itself. And I'm happy to answer questions, but then the applicant and their team is also available.
All right, thank you, Mr. Centenario. Commission members, are there any questions for staff? Commissioner Corman, is your hand up now or no? Okay, it looks. Commissioner Cookton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Centenario, have we approved something similar to this before at another location?
Commissioner Cookton, I'm not familiar with a similar type of use. Early on, we struggled with, essentially what sort of box to put this in. It's not a traditional restaurant. Like your, Applebee's or Chili's or any sort of more chain type restaurant or independent restaurant. It's also not quite like exactly like a private food service, which the classic example of a private food service is a cafeteria as part of a large office development, for example. So it doesn't fit into either box. I'm not aware of something that's quite like this, but the applicant has implemented this at other facilities, and I believe actually at other Cherrywood points, kind of under this sort of framework. And so they might be able to share a little bit more on how that's operated at their other facilities.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for staff at this time from Planning Commission members? All right. Seeing none, Mr. Markegard, I understand Dave Young and I believe it's Michael Paw are online for the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Commission. My name is Dave Young with United Properties. Our goal through this application is to request the ability to provide a safe, comfortable, and inclusive food dining experience for our seniors and their guests. To speak to Planner Centenario's comment about our existing Cherrywood Point, where we've included the ability to purchase beer and wine, it has been a rather successful endeavor. Cherrywood Point of Roseville took that on a couple of years back, has been favored very well by the residents, by their families, especially during the troubled times that we've experienced here the past several months, being that they are rather isolated to their safe community. Having the ability to have that traditional all-inclusive dining experience within their community has been very favorable. So we are again, as Planner Centenario pointed out, this is really just a request for the ability to be able to provide the sale of beer and wine in addition to the food service that is already being provided as part of our community. Our team is here if you have any questions, and thank you for hearing our request.
All right. Thank you for your comments. Commission members, is there any questions for the applicant? Commissioner Cookton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions. First question, Mr. Young. A lot of multifamily developments have some form of security when you walk in, whether it's a fob or a key or whatever. Being that this restaurant is interior to the building, would someone off the street have access to it, or is it behind security?
Mr. Chair, the entire building, all exterior doors are secured doors. There is a 24-hour staff that's located in the building and would have to engage any patron that would come to the facility.
Commissioner Cookton, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A follow-up question. Mr. Young, my other question is your development in Roseville, which you said was very similar to this. Just curious about the neighboring properties to that development here. We're next to a pretty dense office park and also a very dense housing unit. What type of neighbors do you have at your Roseville location?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Our Cherrywood Point of Roseville at Lexington community that currently has the ability to provide beer and wine is located along Lexington Avenue. It is directly across the street from the city offices. It is located to the north and east. It is all residential, kind of existing residential, and there is a multifamily senior apartment building just to the south. We really do not see too much interaction from anybody from outside of indirectly outside of the community, short of some family members and direct guests that take advantage of the dining experience in that community.
Thank you.
Mr. Young, this is Commissioner Solberg. I just maybe a follow-up and then clarity question and then secondary question. So is my understanding with the external door security that really the facility, the restaurant, would be used by the residents and or guests of the residents? Is that essentially where that comes in?
Commissioner Solberg, members of the commission, yes, that is the case. That is what we are expecting out of this, and not expecting really any demand from the outside general public.
All right, thank you for that. The second question was really just and maybe it's not quite as pertinent at this point, but at your Roseville facilities, what's that? Do you have a percentage of the usage that's external to the facility, meaning guests rather than residents?
Commissioner Solberg, members of the commission, I do not have those data points in front of me, but I could tell you that there really is not there's not a large demand. I'm not quite aware of much of a demand at all, to be honest. I cannot say that there has not been any. Obviously, there are friends and family that attend, which are considered public, but just general patron public without some connection to the community is rather rare for everything I'm aware of.
Thank you for answering that. Any additional questions by commission members for Dave Young? Not seeing any. Thank you, Mr. Young, for your comments. And Mr. Markegard, is there anybody from the public that would like to speak to this item?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, nobody has pre-registered, and we haven't. Nobody has called in either.
All right, thank you. All right, seeing nobody that from the public that is interested in speaking to this item, I would entertain a motion from the Planning Commission to close the public hearing. Commissioner Roman?
So moved.
All right, we have a motion to close the public hearing. Is there a second? Commissioner Goldsman?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye by roll call. Commissioner Goldsman?
Aye.
Commissioner Corman?
Aye.
Commissioner Roman?
Aye.
Commissioner Abdi?
Aye.
Commissioner Cookton?
Aye.
An aye for myself. Motion passes. The public hearing is now closed. Discussion from Planning Commission members. Commissioner Roman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I can support this application. I think it provides another type of amenity for senior housing. I happen to have been to one of these types of places in another state, quite accidentally, because it was a restaurant open to the public, and there was nobody there who didn't, other than myself and the person I was visiting with, who wasn't part of the housing development. So it was pretty clear that that time we stumbled into one of those places, we weren't the market, and so I don't think it's going to be a Cowboy Jack's type of a wild and crazy place. Cowboy Jack's is fine. I think it's a different kind of an atmosphere than they're going for here at the point. So I'm supportive. I think it's wholly consistent, and I don't have any major concerns.
Thank you, Commissioner Roman. Commissioner Cookton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did have some early reservations to this application, but I do feel more comfortable being that it's behind security and that adds us a bit of a practical barrier for someone to get into. I had some reservations due to the Normandale Lake Office Park to the south. As a former 20-something who used to work in office space very similar to that, if there was a sandwich being served within 2 miles of my office building, I knew about it. And so I'm happy to hear there's some practical difficulties. That makes me feel more comfortable. The other thing I'll just bring to the other commissioners for consideration is, we are right at the number for parking. I think we're only one to the good in terms of parking with the initial application. And one thing that does stick out to me is that there is no street parking in this neighborhood whatsoever. It's totally non-existent. And so if there were to be a situation where we were overparked here, you're talking about having to cross American Boulevard by foot, which is not great, or park in one of the ramps in the office park, which is also not ideal. So that's just another thing of consideration. That said, from my perspective, I think I feel comfortable enough with those two things and support this application.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Cookton. Commissioner Goldsman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I would second or third the comments, and I think this is a good application. I think it's a good use, as well as it helps provide some value and amenities to those residents. One comment that I have on the parking situation is really looking at this is providing value to the residents that are living there, and the demographics of those residents. The more amenities that you put in their, in their development, the less inclined they are going to be wanting to drive or even own a vehicle. So a lot of the applications that we've seen to date have actually asked for concessions in parking. This actually complies. And so I feel really comfortable with it as it stands today. Now, if the conditions would change, I think we'd have to look at it again. But looking at the demographics, looking at the amenities, I don't think parking really is a concern of mine at this point.
Thank you, Commissioner Goldsman. Are there any other commission members that would like to talk to this item? I myself find myself in support of this application as well. Initially, I had missed the point of the security on the facility, so just trying to understand that very nuanced difference that Mr. Centenario talked about with restaurant versus a food service and how that is controlled. Understanding now more fully the application, that it really provides an amenity to the residents is really first and foremost. And then to the point of parking, I think one of the things we've found much more over the past couple of years is, as Commissioner Goldsman mentioned, is really asking for this request to provide less parking, because oftentimes those parking lots sit empty or at the very least have extra capacity with them. So I am not concerned with the parking on this particular facility either, especially when doubled with the amenity for the units themselves. Is there anybody else that would like to speak to this item? All right, Commissioner Cookton.
If there's no further comments, I'm happy to make a motion.
All right, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, in case PL 2020-184, having been able to make the required findings, I move to recommend City Council approve a major revision to final development plans to incorporate an accessory restaurant within the Cherrywood Point development located at 5501 American Boulevard West, subject to the conditions and code requirements attached to the staff report.
Thank you. We have a motion in front of us. Is there a second? Commissioner Roman.
Second.
All right, thank you. We have a motion and a second in front of us to approve this major revision to the final development plans for Cherrywood Point development. All those in favor say aye by roll call. Commissioner Goldsman.
Aye.
Commissioner Corman.
Aye.
Commissioner Roman.
Aye.
Commissioner Abdi.
Aye.
Commissioner Cookton.
Aye.
And aye for myself. Motion passes. And again, this particular item will move to the City Council on November 23rd. There is a second recommendation in front of us. Do Commissioner Cookton?
Mr. Chair, in case PL 2020-184, having been able to make the required findings, I move to recommend City Council adopt a resolution approving a conditional use permit for an accessory restaurant within the Cherry Point development located at 5501 American Boulevard West, subject to the conditions and code requirements attached to the staff report.
All right, thank you. We have a motion in front of us. Is there a second? Commissioner Goldsman?
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second in front of us to adopt a resolution approving a conditional use permit for an accessory restaurant at Cherrywood Point. All those in favor say aye by roll call. Commissioner Goldsman?
Aye.
Commissioner Corman?
Aye.
Commissioner Roman?
Aye.
Commissioner Abdi?
Aye.
Commissioner Cookton?
Aye.
An aye for myself. Motion passes. This will be at the November 23rd City Council meeting as well for final approval. All right, on to item number 5. Julie, do you have a staff report for us?
There, I couldn't find my unmute.
Okay.
Can you see the screen in front of you?
We can. I see a summary.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going back to the beginning here. Sorry about that.
It's just fine. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and commissioners. Let me just, this is my first time doing this here, so I'm trying to get my bearings. So thank you for your patience. So I'm here tonight to present to you proposed city code amendments related to the temporary pandemic response housing. Let's see, the advance. There we go. So the purpose of these amendments really are coming out of a unique convergence of events that have been either exacerbated or created as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. So you have the increased number of people experiencing unsheltered homelessness. While that was actually something that we were aware of being on the rise pre-pandemic, certainly the pandemic has exacerbated that situation. And in some part due to the capacity of traditional homeless shelters being decreased significantly as a result of the pandemic distancing requirements. At the same time, demand for hotel rooms has dropped substantially along with a reduction in travel. And finally, there have been funding available primarily through the CARES Act to alleviate some of the impacts of the pandemic, and that's been driving some of the interest. So the city really has 3 key objectives here. One is to preserve community safety. Another is to maintain the city's discretion. And finally, of course, we want to try to address the housing needs in this time as well as moving forward. So looking to our comprehensive plan, Forward 2040, for some policy guidance. And in our housing element, there is some very specific guidance that aligns directly with this proposed ordinance change. So there is a strategy, as you can see here, about supporting efforts to address homelessness. And one of the things that it talks about is supporting development of permanent supportive housing. While this is a temporary supportive housing that is moving in that direction. And certainly reviewing our code and trying to minimize barriers to the provision of supportive housing. This is totally in alignment with that policy. So tonight I'm going to kind of go over the highlights and then stand for questions. So just kind of a table of contents here of what I'm going to go through in more detail. But I want to talk about the creation of the new use, the temporary pandemic response housing, and the various standards that we have that we're proposing that go along with that use. We're also looking at doing some other related kind of cleanup and clarification to existing language in the ordinance. So there's some definitions we also want to add a penalty clause to the zoning and development chapters of our code. So jumping into the ordinance and the language around the proposed new use, temporary pandemic response housing. So we're adding this as a new interim use. And so we always like to define our uses that are listed in the code. So you've got a definition that we proposed, and I'll just quickly read it. Temporary pandemic response housing is a building used to house individuals or families to reduce the transmission of disease within the community during a pandemic. So it's a fairly narrow focused type of use. Also, whenever we create a new use, we have to add it to our use tables in chapter 21. So we have all those use tables that say what zoning districts different uses are allowed in, and are they permitted, conditional, or interim. So we would be adding language to show that temporary pandemic response housing is an interim use in the RM50, which is a higher density multiple family residential district. We're also making a slight tweak to the existing regulations regarding the congregate living facilities in the FD2 district. We're creating a new parking rate for this new use. It is a fairly low parking rate, so it's a 0.5 space per unit plus 1 space per staff member. It is our expectation that the tenants, most of the tenants who would be utilizing this sort of facility would not have personal vehicles. So the primary parking need is going to be for the staff, the service provider staff that will be there on site. So getting into some of the requirements and standards. So as an interim use, these are our temporary uses. And we are suggesting a duration limitation of 2 years. We're also suggesting that this use only be allowed in the RM50 zoning district. One of the reasons for that is, for one, to kind of limit where it could go, but also this is intended, the implication of this ordinance is that once the temporary use is over, that it would transition into a permanent type of residential, higher density residential use. So this would be setting the stage for that to happen. The map here shows you where the existing RM50 parcels are. None of these are vacant. These are developed sites or developing sites. There's one parcel that's under construction right now, but all of them are developed or used for permanent housing. And so the idea isn't that any of these parcels would be requesting an IUP for this. Again, it's a short duration. It's not a permanent use, and so it just wouldn't make financial sense for anybody who's already got a permanent housing use to try to do something on a temporary basis. So that said, for this to actually be applied, we would anticipate that it would involve a property that's not currently zoned RM50, and they would have to go through a rezoning and potentially re-guiding, depending on the location of the property. And again, this gets to some of that discretion that the city would have by going through a zoning review. The city would have some discretion as to whether or not the location makes sense. So we have requirements proposed for in the language, some of it dealing with licensing requirements. So we're proposing that this use would be licensed as rental housing, which subjects it to the regulations that we have in Chapter 14 and any other kind of regulations related to rental housing. We wanted to make sure that there was a strong security plan, so the provider would have to submit a security plan for approval by our chief of police. And we identify in the ordinance language several of the provisions that would need to be included in that plan. So you can see them there, but there's be security personnel and how many, what their training is, when would they be on site, would their hours be, protocols for keeping lines of communication open between the facility and the police department, security cameras, and then also anything else that the chief of police might request, because each situation could be unique. Similarly, we would require the provider to provide a management and operations plan that the city would approve. We're the issuing authority. And that would need to address a number of items, including the experience and qualifications of the property manager. Again, looking at the staffing that's going to be on site and what are those schedules and protocols regarding record keeping, communication, emergency response, property maintenance, a code of conduct for the tenants on site regarding, so that would be a policy on drug and alcohol use, and also maintaining occupancy data and a plan for reducing the spread of disease. There's a requirement to meet building and site requirements in our code. One of the big ones here is that this use could not be mixed with other uses on site. So if there's a building on site, it would have to be totally used as the temporary pandemic response housing. It couldn't be partially used for some other use. They would have to meet building codes, both state, international property maintenance code. We call out specifically some of the city requirements, parking, although the rate is set in the standards here, but other parking requirements in our code that could be the size of the stalls, the drive aisles, et cetera. Lighting standards, particularly security lighting. Some of the other things that we haven't called out, I mean, this is going to, again, because it's an interim use, it's not that somebody is going to come with and redevelop a parcel for a 2-year use. So this is generally going to be use of an existing building. So things like landscaping and some of the other setbacks and whatnot, the structure is going to be in place, and some of those things are going to be in place. We also have a clause in there about inspections, just to make it very clear that the city has the right to perform periodic inspections. And then there's kind of the catch-all clause that allows the city to impose any additional conditions via the interim use permit, and that's pretty standard. And then there are some proposed amendments to existing language in the code. Several definitions we're proposing some minor changes to, and I don't have them up here on the screen, but they are in the ordinance. They're also were called out in the staff report, so we can get into specific questions if you have those when we get to the question portion here. I did just want to point out that we are proposing to delete one of the definitions, full service hotel, because of some of the changes we're making to the definition of hotel or motel really encompasses it, so it's redundant having full service hotel. So that's kind of a cleanup. We're also adding a penalty clause, and this is kind of the standard penalty clause that exists in other chapters of the code. For whatever reason, it was never incorporated into Chapter 19 or 21. So this is somewhat of a cleanup item. It's always makes enforcement more clean if the penalty clause is actually embedded into the section or the chapter of the code that there might be a violation to. So it's kind of a cleanup and a transparency amendment. So to wrap things up, I want to circle back to the key objectives and how the proposed amendments address those key objectives. So as you can see here, the main thing under meeting housing needs is really just creating this use as an interim use. It's not something that we have now. We don't have a way to really deal with this sort of a use now. So that was our intent, is to provide a means, a tool, if you will, to address a temporary housing situation, a need. In terms of maintaining discretion, there's several things. The clarification to the definitions help with that. The limitation on the duration of 2 years, limiting to the RM50 district, as I said previously. The use standards that are in there give us discretion. We have to approve many of those plans, the security plan, the management and operations plan, and then just including the licensing requirements. With regard to preserving safety, adding that penalty clause makes that cleaner and more transparent. The requirement for the security plan, and again, the maintenance, the management operations plan also can address kind of on-site security and staffing and such. And then the inspection provisions. Just to kind of summarize also just our outreach. So as per norm, we published a public hearing notice in the Sun Current. We sent out notice via email to our e-subscribe groups. We posted this on our city website, so the public could go in and take a look at the proposed amendments as well as the other information, including the staff report. And then just earlier this week, Mayor Bussey did a council minute, which is the weekly video update that he does, and there was a piece specific to these amendments on that. So next steps, well, we're having the public hearing here before the Planning Commission tonight, and then this will, assuming you recommend it move forward, this would be going to the City Council for public hearing on Monday. So with that, I'm proposing this motion that, and I guess I'll come back to this when we get to the time of the motion, but I'm recommending, staff is recommending approval of this code amendment. And I will stand now for any questions that you might have. And before we get started too, I wanted to say, apparently we just got an email that had some questions. I haven't had a chance to look at it. So maybe when we get to the public comment period, I don't know if Mr. Markegard has access to those questions, but if not, I can try to find them. So with that, I'll stand for your questions.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Certainly we can get to those questions. Hopefully that'll be during the public comment period. We'll address that. But first, let's start with commission members. Any questions for Julie Farnham? Commissioner Goldsman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Ms. Farnham, one question I have is really around how our code or this item addresses the need for other amenities or resources on these types of housing. Just looking at, the type of people that are coming in, there's going to be a lot of need here for additional resources like social workers or food, education resources, et cetera. Is there anything in the code or, in this that addresses that need either on-site or potentially a transportation to the resources off-site? And I'll take that question offline.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Goldsman. So in general, this use would be conducted by a service provider, like the county or a nonprofit organization, who would be providing social services on site, as well as food on site. So, but in terms of transportation, there isn't, well, I guess it would really depend on the service provider. Some of them might provide some kind of transportation, but there is nothing in the language that requires them to provide transportation services, for instance.
Did that answer your question, Commissioner Goldsman?
Yes, to follow up, the reason I ask is to make sure that we're not limiting this type of development to just housing, that they could also provide those other resources within that same facility. I just want to make sure we're not putting ourselves or painting ourselves into a corner here, to make sure that, you know, if the state agency or other type of nonprofit, just making sure that we allow for that as well if there's appropriate space for that.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Goldsman, I want to make sure I'm understanding your question, because by definition, this is this specific interim use is a residential use. So I just want to make that clear, and maybe I'm not fully understanding your question.
If I may.
Go ahead, Commissioner Goldsman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I think the question is if this is housing available, and I think that's within the scope. I just want to make or ask the question of if there are other needs other than housing to these residents. Is that an opportunity to have that need addressed as well as in housing? And maybe this is a secondary opportunity that is not addressed in this code.
Is that a clarification of if those are prohibited to provide some social services to the residents? Is that, because I think that's part of my question as well. I don't know if you can answer that, Julie.
Sure, Mr. Chair. Social services, the provider in general, like I said, we would anticipate that folks who would apply for this use would have the capabilities to provide social services. It would be specifically to provide social services related to folks who needed housing. So again, whether it be, I mean, it could range from, well, we've talked about food. It could be counseling. It could be, there could be other things. It depends on who the applicant is. So there's nothing in the code that is saying you can't provide social services or what social services you have to provide. It's just generally anticipated that anybody who would actually do this use, would provide this use, would be providing social services. And there is actually in the operation and maintenance plan, it does speak to that. So perhaps, I don't know if you all have your ordinance in front of you, and because it's not in my, I'll just try to read this if you'll bear with me here.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So the requirement related to management and operational requirements is that the applicant must submit a management and operations plan that must be provided by the issuing, that must be approved, by the issuing authority prior to commencement of the use. The management and operations plan must identify the property management and describe their demonstrated experience and qualifications, on-site staffing and supervisory personnel, including staff schedules, record-keeping protocols to ensure accuracy and completion, occupancy data, code of conduct, including policy on drug and alcohol use, protocols for communication with the city, emergency response protocols, property maintenance protocols, approach to community outreach and communication, pandemic plans for reducing the spread of disease within the facility and following government health guidance, and a description of on-site services, including meals and laundry. Does that address your question?
Commissioner Goldsman, that works?
It works. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, it clarified it for me as well. Commissioner Roman, you had a question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Farnham, looking at the parcels identified on the map, and I'm just looking at two of them are parcels we've discussed tonight. They're not even necessarily built. Another one of them is under construction. Another one we last year approved a tax increment financing for, I think, 30% AMI housing for 25 years. So I'm seeing these parcels on this map, and it looks like to me about half of them are not even perhaps under consideration for this type of use. Are there other, are any of these other ones under any sort of long-term, either a TIF kind of a arrangement that would limit their reuse, or some other specific use that I'm just kind of trying to determine how many of these are realistically even an option for this type of use?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Roman, as I mentioned when I had this map up, so the reason why we're limiting it to the RM50 is because we see this interim use as a transition to a permanent housing kind of use. But it's an interim use. It's only 2 years. So we're not anticipating that any of these properties that are currently zoned RM50 would be candidates for this use. We wouldn't anticipate that any of the property owners here would request an IUP for this. It's a 2-year use. The entire property would have to be used for temporary pandemic response housing. It couldn't be mixed in with regular rental housing, for instance. So we don't see any of those parcels being candidates for this use. It could happen, but that just seems really, really unlikely given just the economics of it. So what we would anticipate is that any request for this would involve a rezoning and probably a re-guiding. So, for instance, you're probably aware that there's a lot of hotels that are kind of looking at shelters. And so if one of them came forward and wanted to request this, they would have to rezone. And we would look at whether or not, so looking at the rezoning is one point of discretion for the city, whether or not that site makes sense for long-term residential use. But again, the existing sites that are zoned RM50, we don't anticipate any of those being candidates. A candidate site would likely be a site that's not currently zoned RM50 and would need to be rezoned.
Thank you, that's helpful. And if I may, another question, Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Commissioner Roman.
Thank you. Ms. Farnham, in our current code, if I wanted to rent out the Hilton Hotel near my house, and I wanted to rent the whole hotel, and I wanted to rent it for 6 months, is that permitted under current code?
No, because it's a hotel is limited to a 30-day. Let's see what that. Well, let me look at.
That's okay. I trust your judgment on the language.
Yeah,
I was wondering if there was a difference between am I choosing to rent 2 rooms? Am I choosing to rent the entire building and enter into a use agreement with the property owner in that kind of an arrangement?
Right, and actually one of the changes to the hotel definition is to make that very clear. And I'll just read it to you. It says any building, so this is the definition of a hotel or motel, any building or combination of buildings containing 6 or more rooms used for sleeping purposes by guests in which a person or persons pay for occupancy, possession, or tenancy of the property, and where the actual term of occupancy, possession, or tenancy of the property pursuant to that lease, license, or other agreement is less than 30 consecutive calendar days. A hotel or motel does not include bed and breakfast, resort, vacation homes, crash pads, hostel, congregate living facilities, multiple family dwellings, shelters, temporary pandemic response housing, or other uses separately defined.
That's the proposed language, correct?
That's correct.
And but the current language does not have the 30-day limit. Is that accurate?
It doesn't, but, and I may have get some clarity here from Mr. Markegard, but that is how we interpret something like a hotel versus residence. That we have that 30-day maximum stay.
Sure. Mr. Markegard, did you want to clarify?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So the current definition of hotel says that stays must be transient in nature. Then we have another definition in the zoning ordinance about transient lodging facilities that talks about 30-day or lessened stay. So that's clarified in another definition in the zoning ordinance.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have any further questions, Commissioner Roman?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Commissioner Abdi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A lot of good questions from the other commissioners that I had were addressed. The only question I had were is in the RM50 district, what are the sizes of the property types allowed, like high rises, apartments, like hotels, stuff like that? And I appreciate the question asked by Commissioner Roman in terms of like the current properties shown on the map and your response to possibly new applications not being available to these sites, and then new applicants would be requesting a rezoning application. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is types of sizes of properties or types of properties that fall or permitted under our RM50. Because I guess what I'm trying to visualize is if I am near a property that qualifies for a higher rezoning and I'm in a single family district, in a single family house, but I'm possibly surrounded by higher density zoning classes, zoning districts, and if I were to apply for a rezoning of my property to convert to allow for this type of use, is a single family house possibly in an RM50 allowed to have this type of temporary housing use, or is it only in a high-rise apartment, hotel style types of housing projects? I don't know if that's clear at all. I was trying to think out loud in terms of like types of buildings in the RM50 in the zoning district, and then thinking ahead for potential rezoning for a low-density single-family house. If it were to be rezoned for this type of use, would it be allowed, considering that the allowance is based on the district, not on the property type?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Abdi, I'll take a first crack, but I think I'm going to ask Mr. Markegard to jump in with some of the specifics, because he's a lot more familiar with all the details in the code with regard to lot sizes and the like. Again, so with regard to like a single family property, in order to do this kind of use, you would have to rezone to RM50. And probably that, well, I know that would not be large enough, because a single family site is we don't have very many single family sites left that haven't been subdivided into a more typical kind of lot size. And then you would also have to get a re-guiding of the property, go through a comp plan amendment. And it's, you know, there could be some locations in the city where that makes sense, but there's probably going to be a lot of locations that it doesn't make sense, because we wouldn't want to have some island of high density in the middle of a single family residential area. So I don't know if that was getting at part of your question, but I know part of your question was also about what is the minimum size requirement, and then also the RM50. So it's called multifamily residential, and the 50 stands for the maximum density. So that's 50 units per acre. We also have another district called RM24, which is less, and we've got an RM 100. So that gives you a sense of the sort of density that is required in this zoning district.
Mr. Markegard, would you like to speak to maybe more of the specifics on the details of the RM50 versus residential lots?
Sure, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Abdi. So RM50 has a lot of characteristics that would make a single family lot really ineligible. One requirement is a minimum of 80,000 square feet in lot area, so that's a little bit under 2 acres. Typical single family lot in Bloomington is 11,000 square feet. So definitely not eligible from that perspective. But then beyond that, the intent of the section of the RM50 zoning district talks about land needing to be near an arterial or collector street, needing to be near high quality transit, and needing to be near amenities. And again, that would make most single family lots ineligible. So really it would not be feasible for a single family lot to be rezoned to RM50.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Go ahead.
I guess based on what I'm reading so far in the conversations that we're having, I feel like to accomplish this need that exists, it is very limiting to do that based on what is being proposed in terms of the RM50 requirements and based on the availabilities right now, currently shown on the map, and any considerations in terms of like dropping it to RM25 so that there are more opportunities for properties in those other districts that may allow for this interim use to take place. Considering that I feel like based on what I'm hearing, the RM50 is very limiting for an agency or a nonprofit organization to come in to the Bloomington area to provide this service, this interim service in Bloomington based on our zoning district limitation.
Yeah, Commissioner Abdi, I'll take a first crack at that, and maybe Mr. Markegard want to add to this. Again, I mean, you're correct. This is just opening the door a little, ways to accommodate this use. It's one tool. Certainly, we want to look at addressing homelessness in a broader way, and we certainly are looking to do that. This is certainly not the answer to do that. This is really trying to respond to more of a kind of a unique or almost emergency kind of a situation. And so you're right, it's very limiting here. But again, even if we opened it up to RM24, most of those properties, unless it was a vacant parcel, and even if it was a vacant parcel, for somebody to come in and develop a new structure in order to do this use, the economics are such that to do that to get permission to do it for 2 years, it's really probably not going to be feasible. So the most likely scenario for the use, for the application of this IUP tool would be for the reuse of an existing. Hotels are the easiest probably choice, or a use like that. You're not going to convert. A property owner is unlikely to convert an existing, say, rental apartment building in order to allow it to be used for 2 years for temporary pandemic response housing. It could happen if you had like a completely vacant building. Just the possibility that the situation of that happening is pretty remote.
Thank you.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, if I may. I don't know, this
Go
is a
ahead.
different question. I don't know this is specific statistics in terms of like what the current needs are in Bloomington, whether it is specific to the homelessness or the other the displacements that has happened as a result of the pandemic to the Bloomington community. If there is a vacant lot, considering that this is an interim use, if there is an entity that had the money to construct temporary structures on a vacant lot that meets the lot sizes in this subject district, would that be considered? Based on my reading right now, it says it will likely not be. It would have to be in existing structures. Is that true?
Commissioner Abdi, it doesn't have to be in a existing structure. The economics are such that to build a building for a use that is only allowed for 2 years, it just doesn't make a lot of, it's not very feasible. Also, the way the code is written, the amendments are written, it does say that you need to meet building codes. And so a temporary structure would not likely meet those requirements.
Again, Mr. Chair, would a trailer style structure meet? There have been a lot of different models out there that reconfigure trailers and like tiny homes type of styles that can be plotted on the huge lot that's out there to house a number of people. Is that something that the city is open to considering as an alternative temporary use of the site? And whoever that entity ends up being can pack up those structures and possibly reuse them at a different parts of the county or somewhere else in the state. I guess what I'm trying to figure out is an alternative to, because this is an interim use, it's very limited in terms of like the period of 2 years up to 5 years, I believe, to not limit the creativity of the housing needs, the ways we can provide housing to folks in need, even in a temporary period. Sorry, I'm thinking out loud, and it might not come. It's not coming out as a specific question, and maybe it's more of a comment. But is there limitations to having tiny homes, for a lack of a better word, tiny homes on one of those lots to allow for this to happen?
Commissioner Abdi, well, first I want to say, I appreciate kind of your line of questioning. I mean, you're getting at an issue that we are certainly aware of, and that is affordable housing, having enough affordable housing, addressing that situation. And also, as I said, obviously in our comp plan, we were even thinking about the homeless situation and are aware that the suburbs are not immune to homelessness, and these are issues that the city is interested in addressing. This particular tool is a very limited tool and is, for lack of a better word, you could maybe say it's kind of a baby step in that direction. I think that there are other avenues and certainly other things that the city is wanting to keep moving forward on, particularly around affordable housing. which could help with the homeless situation. One of the things that we are looking at is also because, not just because of the pandemic, but the whole shifting of markets. And we're already starting to see some interest in reuse of hotels, for instance. And we've got a lot of hotels in Bloomington, as you are aware. And so one of the things that we're looking at having on our work plan for next year is doing a study of hotel conversions to residential as a way to, explore some opportunities to maybe create more affordable housing. So that's just an example of just another thing. So we're going to have to move forward on multiple fronts here. This is really a single tool. It's a small tool that's trying to address a very kind of specific set of circumstances, and so it's not designed to address some of these broader issues that you've brought up. But that's not to say that that those aren't on the city's radar, and that the city doesn't want to take steps to address those.
Thank you. Commissioner Abdi, did you have any further questions? Commissioner Abdi, did you have any further questions?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
The mute button got me there. All right. Any other commissioners have questions for staff at this point? Just a clarification again, and I think Commissioner Roman brought it up. Currently, we don't have any kind of provision that would allow kind of this temporary response to pandemic that would allow more than 30 days in any facilities in the city. Is that correct?
Chair Solberg, that is correct.
And so this is, again, while it doesn't in its own right open up facilities, it does open up the door for other facilities or other locations to go through the city process in order to obtain this permission. Is that correct?
Yes, that is the intent.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to clarify that that's where that is. Commissioner Goldsman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. One question I have is just about the timeline of these types of requests. So talking about someone in, let's say, a hotel type situation, 30 days is our limit. What is a typical turnaround for a rezoning request? If there is a agency that wants to come in and house people, is it, I think 30 days is probably pretty aggressive, but what is a typical turnaround if there was a perfect property that would want to do this?
Sure, Commissioner Goldsman. First, I just want to make clear that the 30 days does not apply to this. Currently, we only allow up to 30 days for a stay in like a hotel. And so that's one of the things that this tool is trying to do. So this would allow this use to exist for up to 2 years, as opposed, so it wouldn't be subjected to that 30-day limit that hotels are subjected to. So, and that 2-year clock would start at the time that the use actually commenced. So the rezoning and all of that would happen before. Those would all be part of the entitlement process. But in general, rezoning, you come in and you do your application, and it's 60 days. We try to turn things around in 60 days. Now, if there is a comp plan amendment, which it's very likely that there would be a comp plan amendment, and some of these can happen administratively. We kind of have to look at the case by case basis if it can be done administratively. And when I say administratively, that's by the Metropolitan Council staff review. Um, uh, and that has to do with the different factors like impacts on regional systems, et cetera, and how big the parcel is and how many units it might involve and that kind of thing. So every situation could be unique. But if it could happen administratively, it can happen really concurrently with the rezoning. So that could be fairly quick. I mean, it would be as quick as anybody coming through with a final site and building plan recommendation or application. So it could be as quick as 60 days. You know, sometimes, as you know, things get delayed or postponed. You get into a public hearing situation, or if it's controversial and more information is requested, and so that can happen, and that can delay a process. But generally, we are required to turn around approvals. I think in the maximum it's 120 days. So that would be kind of at the far outside. And does that answer your question?
Partially. I just wanted to clarify the question, making sure. So the reason I ask is I know we're in the middle of a pandemic and people need housing today. So if somebody starts the process, they have 30 days to essentially have them in, hotel, and then they can do the request for rezoning. I just want to know when the clock starts to tick for them. How quickly we turn things around. And so that's just, I understand the 30 days, it doesn't apply to this, but it could apply to somebody who would need housing and getting this set up. So yeah, I think I'm good now. Thank you.
Sure. And Commissioner Goldsman, just to follow up on one thing. So we think it's a good idea to have this in the code because, this pandemic could endure for a while. Certainly for the next year. And, we certainly have heard a lot about, this sort of pandemic could come along again. Maybe it'll be 50 years. Maybe it'll be sooner than that. So we think that it's a good idea to have this tool in our toolbox, essentially, to respond so that we're ready when something else like this comes up. And hopefully, we can respond to this pandemic if there's a request that comes up.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for staff at this point? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Markergaard, do you have comments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Just one clarification for the record in terms of the tiny homes. Bloomington City Codes currently do not allow a tiny home, so just wanted to clarify that would require a code amendment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. All right.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. I apologize if my hand's not working.
Oh, okay. Go ahead, Mr. Cookton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Barnum, just maybe a bit of a further question on the hotel. So if an existing low density hotel had an application to be converted into this temporary housing, so it gets rezoned to RM50, and then the hotel becomes a usage and it's an interim use permit for 2 years. What happens after that 2 years? Do we have a hotel that's now non-conforming in its zoning district and we have to go back and rezone it, or do we have a non-conforming use, or what happens after that 2 years?
Commissioner Cookton, so ideally what would happen after that 2 years is that there would be that the property owner would sell it, or that there would be a developer who would be interested in redeveloping or permanent housing. So what would expire after the 2 years is the temporary use of the property. So in looking at the rezoning of these, I mean, those are some of the things that we'd be looking at is the suitability for long-term permanent housing to transition to long-term permanent housing. So that's certainly the intent, is to set this up so that you can transition from the interim use to a permanent multifamily residential use.
Mr. Chair, a follow-up, if I may.
Go ahead, please.
So, Ms. Farnham, is the expectation then, if a hotel were to be used for this use, that that would not go back to a hotel after the interim use of 2 years? It would be developed into something else?
Commissioner Cookdown, that is correct.
And Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Mr. Markegard.
Commissioner Cookton, just to add on to that, with the RM50 rezoning, it would not be able to go back to a hotel. Hotels are not allowed in RM50, so that's one characteristic of rezoning to RM50 is if it were a hotel originally converted to temporary pandemic response housing, its route forward after 2 years would be as permanent housing.
As permanent housing. All right. Are there any additional questions? I can see your hand now, Commissioner Cookdown. So I don't know if you have additional questions or.
I do have a further follow-up question, if I may. Is there any limit? Maybe this is a question for Mr. Markegard or Ms. Farnham. Is there a limit to how often a parcel can be rezoned? So if I've got a hotel, gets rezoned to RM50, my 2-year interim use permit ends, I want to go back to being a hotel. Can I just rezone to go back to what I was doing before? Or is there some sort of limitation on that in our code?
Commissioner Cookdown, we certainly don't have restrictions on you applying to rezone. Whether you would actually get an approval to do that is another question, though. I mean, and again, the likelihood of somebody doing that, because it's a process to rezone, and again, you would probably have to re-guide it again, and there's fees involved and whatnot, and so I don't think it's something that people do or developers do just lightly. But that said, could somebody come in after 2 years is up and say, you know, the market is shifted and office is really hot, and you know, I want to propose rezoning this to an office or something, or commercial zoning district, and you know, we would look at it. It's an application. We would review it. Whether it would make sense or not and would be approved, I guess, would be based on the specific circumstances.
Any further questions, Commissioner Cookton?
No, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. All right. One more time here. Any planning commission members have any questions for staff at this point? Triggered any additional questions that you're looking to answer from staff? Not seeing any. As the city is the applicant, we'll move to open the public hearing. And Mr. Markegard, is there any individuals from the public that would like to speak to this item at this point?
Mr. Chairman, we had nobody pre-register to speak, and nobody has called in this evening yet. I just checked with Mr. Pease. We did receive one email during the meeting, I think 6:38 p.m., and I have forwarded that to the planning commissioners, and that has been our only correspondence on this item.
Okay, as we are all in this, would it, I guess I would ask the commission members if you think it'd be appropriate at this point if staff could read that email for us or summarize it. If I can get a verbal indication of up or down, I would appreciate that. I'm seeing some yeses, so Mr. Markegard, if you could please provide that information for us here in the meeting, that would be appreciated.
All right, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, let me actually put that on the screen. Just a second. I've copied it into another document here for you.
Okay, thank you.
So, if you'd like me to read it, I can do that.
No, I think this is fine. This is presented. The public can see it. We can read it. If this is the entirety of it, then that works. I didn't, at the point, didn't know if it was 1 page or 6 pages or what. So thank you.
And there is more. This is the first paragraph.
Okay, if you want to go to the next. Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you for providing that for us. I think a lot of these questions have already been asked by the Planning Commission members to staff. So with that, I don't know that there's a whole lot additional that needs to be asked of staff at this point that won't be covered most likely in our discussion on the event. So with that being the only public comment at this point, I would entertain a motion to close the public hearing. Commissioner Roman.
So moved.
All right, I have a motion to close the public hearing. Is there a second? I have no idea if I can't see hands right now, Mr. Markegard.
Sorry.
Oh, Commissioner Cookton.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. All those in favor say aye by roll call. Commissioner Goldsman?
Aye.
Commissioner Corman?
Aye.
Commissioner Roman?
Aye.
Commissioner Abdi?
Aye.
Commissioner Cookton?
Aye.
An aye for myself. Motion passes. The public hearing is now closed. Now for discussion on the request in front of us from Planning Commission members. Would anybody like to start us off? I will go ahead and start with some thoughts on the subject. Initially seeing this, I like the idea that the city is taking the approach of looking at an ordinance that will lay out conditions for which a temporary housing can exist in the city of Bloomington. As I think many people are aware, there are some facilities in Bloomington right now that are operating, and I also understand that those are under some level of enforcement. So taking a step forward to allow it is a positive, although it does strike me as ironic that we talk about temporary pandemic response, and just from what we heard even tonight here is the length of time that it could potentially take to establish this. So this is an area where I'm not sure where to go based on what we've seen here tonight, because there is a need that exists. There is a need to make sure that the city has controls around providing facilities and for uses, just like any other use that's in the city. But on the other side, we're kind of stuck with this long process. So I'm going to stop there at this point and let some other commission members talk about their views. Commissioner Roman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think your conversation started in the direction of some of my initial thoughts. We all are aware that the homeless, or I think the term of art I've been hearing lately is houseless. The houseless crisis is not new, and it's not going away. So while the ability of existing long-term shelters to house people has been reduced, creating extra pressures, I don't think this is a long-term problem that is going away. And so, while we might be helping to ease pressure on some facilities in the short term, that it will exist afterward. I think that, in my opinion, I think you're right. There have been some locations in Bloomington and elsewhere, not just only Bloomington, but there have been challenges. I happen to know some people who have stayed in a facility that was also housing some of this use, and there were challenges even when they were there, and they made a different choice of where to stay in the future for that reason. So I get that we don't want to have multiple uses in the same place. I really appreciate the staff's outline about the criteria in the safety column. I think those are good things to have in a plan. I think those are the kinds of things that I would want to see in a use that is in some ways transient. I mean, even though it is a longer use for people who are homeless, this is not intended to be permanent home even for those folks. So those things I'm all in alignment on. What I struggle with is, on one hand, we've identified a list of concerns that we want to make sure would be addressed in this kind of a use. And then we're saying this kind of use should only be in a residential area, which is typically your more long-term permanent residence. And I'm not sure that I find those to be a match that I would agree with. I think having those kinds of uses in some of the places where, again, I understand we talked about that our existing hotels could be candidates for that only under a rezoning. Then you create, I think, some of the hotels that we have that are near or adjacent to a residential area, where sometimes our RM50 is not usually an island unto itself. It's usually somewhat connected with other residential uses. So, but I think the hardest thing for me is that what this ordinance says to me is that if you want to essentially have your hotel be used for something else, you're done being a hotel in Bloomington. And that feels, it doesn't feel right to me. There's parts of this I like. There's parts of this that feel very old school. Let the suburbs be a sheltered island unto themselves, and that doesn't sit right with me. So those are my initial thoughts right now.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldsman?
Yeah, I would echo what Commissioner Roman had commented on, is turning, rezoning, turning it into one use, and then not being able to go back to using it as a hotel market requires, I think that also doesn't sit well as it makes it so it's no longer a temporary situation. And I hope that we're not in 2 years talking about the pandemic anymore or the situation, but being able to react and serve or fill this need quickly. It's kind of back to that question that I had about the timeline and the turnaround. If, we have this need now, we have people in our community now. If we have to go through this process in 60 days, that will permanently change the use of that facility. I'm not quite sure that I would agree. I think this being a baby step, a small tool, I think is great. Maybe we need to refine it a bit to make sure that we're helping those people that need that resource and facility.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Goldsman. Commissioner Cookton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also have a concern with the rezoning to RM50 and being left with a non-conforming use after your interim use permit is up. I think there's also a practical limitation that, a pandemic is inherently unforeseen. And so in the event of a future pandemic, to convert a hotel into this usage, you have to convert the hotel and then also be willing to redevelop it into a higher density usage or a residential usage. And it seems to me that if you're willing to redevelop it later on, the financials will probably tell you to just redevelop it right away. And so I have a hard time seeing where it could ever be accomplished where an existing hotel gets converted for 2 years and then gets developed into something else due to the surprise nature of a pandemic, and the financials that go into a project like that take a long time. And I see some real practical difficulties in this playing out for hotels with the current setup of this application.
Thank you, Commissioner Cookton. Any additional thoughts from Planning Commission members? Commissioner Corman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I look at this project, first of all, I just want to say thank you, to the developers and for putting this together, for bringing this this type of initiative. I think it's very important, that we recognize the current need that we have, especially during this pandemic. And for me to even imagine that there will be a place for many families where they can be, even if it's for a year or two, I think that's a great step. So I truly appreciate that. There's a lot of our students that are homeless. Their families are homeless and they need a place to go. They need a place that's stable, a place, a constant situation that provides a stability versus trying to figure out, where to go back and forth from place to place during pandemic time, when it is already difficult, the learning that's happening right now during this pandemic makes it a lot more difficult. So I truly appreciate the fact that maybe there is an opportunity there for many families. I do have same concerns that other commissioners have expressed, in terms of this could prevent some of the owners from taking the step into facilitating this type of setting if they know that they cannot go back to where they were before. So that would be kind of my main concern is, are we maybe opening the door for a great opportunity to help members of our community, but then at the same time may not be happening because it will prevent those owners from doing it because of the concerns of what might happen after those 2 years.
Thank you, Commissioner Corman. Commissioner Abdi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate staff's presentation and the dialogue that we're having about this need of the need of this ordinance. My only feeling is that it is too restrictive. The question from the public, the comment that we received was, is this pandemic definition as a result of the COVID that we're trying to get at? Some of the presentation conversations included homelessness in general. Is that a pandemic in itself, but per definition? The question alluded also to the civil unrest, and I don't think that's what we're talking about when we say pandemic. I'm assuming that, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, when we say pandemic, in this case, we're talking about the COVID situation that we're facing and some of the families being displaced, the need that's happening right now to house individuals, to make sure that people are healthy and are meeting the needs for housing. I feel that RM50 is too restrictive. I'm not sure. I haven't closely looked at the other districts that you mentioned, the RM24, 25, you said, and another one that you mentioned, what the concentration of those are and their disbursements of those districts throughout the city are like, if we are really trying to address this need in the community, considering that it is a short period of time through the interim use. I think opening it up a little bit more to other districts might, and I don't know what the feel would be like for staff to allow this in other districts, but I feel like RM50 is in itself is too restrictive. And having to have, considering that rezoning is a land use application, that it stays with the property when an application to rezone comes through. If it's approved for future rezoning to an RM50, that property will continue to forever be RM50 unless somebody else ends up rezoning it to something else. So do we need more potential RM50s in the city? Because this is a proposed interim use, why not allow it in other districts to discourage the potential increase in other creations of more RM50 districts? I don't know if that's clear, but I'm thinking out loud so far.
Oh, that's good. Thank you. Appreciate those comments.
Chair, may I be recognized?
Yes, go ahead, Heather Worthington.
Thank you, Chair, Planning Commissioners. There are a couple of things I would ask Megan Rogers, our attorney, to respond to that I think maybe require some clarification, if she may. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Megan Rogers, can you please address us?
Chair and members of the Planning Commission, I just want to take a moment as we work through this to talk about the sort of different rights and responsibilities that are indicated by the interim use process in general. And so unlike a conditional use permit that you approved earlier this evening, the interim use is intended to target, it has to be limited in the duration of its nature. And it's usually, it's intended to look at a specific need. And so I think when we think about what the rezoning, reguiding, and the interim use permit would do together, is it would be looking at a property to see whether or not it is an appropriate place to house people and to provide services to them successfully for a period of a pandemic response. But then perhaps more importantly, it's also projecting into the future to say this facility was appropriate for a residential use. It has access to transit. It has access to the additional to the arterial roadways so that people can get to work and to jobs and to other things that they need to have to be successful members of the community. And so that at the expiration of this pandemic, it would retain its residential character. It would be appropriate for the residential surroundings, and then would provide for housing potentially after being potentially outfitted or already existingly appropriate for residential housing, would provide very low to low income housing for people and improve that stock, that 30% stock that you were talking with Ms. Shoquist earlier about tonight in the meeting today. And so I think that's sort of the policy craft that we're looking at in terms of moving from the interim use to a more permanent use, rather than thinking of this as a Band-Aid. It's more of an opportunity that this is a good site for living. There's access to things around it that people need, that recognizing that hotels can be used to shelter people, but they are not necessarily appropriate for housing. And so this is more housing in nature than hotel. And then in terms of the definitions that we have presented for you tonight, to sort of clarify what the longstanding interpretation has been of city staff of what transient occupancy is for hotels. And so I just think it's important to clarify that the interim use is really intended to create a successful space for temporary pandemic relief facilities, in addition to providing space for transition to more permanent housing in the future.
Thank you. Just a quick question, because I'm following some of the logic there, but on the other side, the question I'd have is, if we're thinking about addressing kind of the immediate needs with this ordinance in front of us, with transitioning to the future, it doesn't prohibit it if we allowed the underlying use to be maintained, and then they came forward with a development plan in 2 years, would it?
Mr. Chair, I think I need to hear that question one more time.
Just understanding your logic was this is kind of the step forward to potentially developing other, well, if we want, housing in the future. And this is a, if we will, a more immediate response to a need, but again, is kind of that bridge. It doesn't, the current process of, and let's just use, I think people are using the example of a hotel, but there could be other buildings or structures that could be used potentially in this manner. But allowing an interim use in that sort of facility as a response to these unique times for a specific time period, would that prohibit a use change at that facility in 2 years? Like, for instance, we use a hotel for them to say, we would like to rezone into RM50 at November of 2022?
Well, and so this is why the RM50 designation is important. Because what we would ask an applicant to do who is applying for this interim use is to say, this is an appropriate site for residential housing. And so I am asking for a rezoning and potentially a re-guiding to RM50, and the IUP is specifically eligible to be used in the RM50 district because it would meet the immediate needs of a population, but also would meet the future needs of a population. And so that it would, and so that's why all of those things go together. Because one of the things that I think we want to be thoughtful about in utilizing the IUP is that the property can be successful in meeting all of the conditions of the use. And so there are very specific properties that are probably well suited to that in the city, and the city would be able to make the rezoning and the re-guiding findings in relationship to those properties. There are other properties that probably would not be as appropriate for long-term housing.
Thank you. Are there any questions for either Megan Rogers or Heather Worthington from commission members? Commissioner Corman, is your hand up? Oh, sorry. All right. Any other commission members? Commissioner Roman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to staff for those additional details. I speak for myself, I rely on the wisdom of folks who do this professionally to help us understand these things. I guess I don't disagree with some of the logic for some of those ideas about why we might say, I do agree that, you know, we want to provide housing for almost individuals or families. It's desirable for it to be a residential type of an environment where there is going to be a transition, hopefully, for folks to a permanent housing situation. I also think that there is we know there's a confluence of reasons that this is even on the table. One is, you know, we have people who are in crisis. We have a system that doesn't have enough capacity to provide housing for them. We have a hotel industry that's in crisis. Due to the pandemic, and travel is down, and you know, folks are struggling to keep their businesses afloat. And then we have an influx of federal dollars to try to support some of these things. I can see, you know, you can see where these pieces come together. My concern would be is X property is interested in providing this type of housing under the terms that we've laid out for an IUP. And it happens for the maximum amount of 2 years. I'm unsure that the resources are going to be there in 2 years to convert that to long-term housing. If that was the case, to one of the comments earlier, it would have gone just directly to that already, or someone may go directly to that. So what my concern might be is that by requiring this kind of a shift in properties designation and kind of essentially forcing the hand of the future use, there is a possibility you could have a property that goes vacant. And these would not be small properties in an RM50 type of a situation. So those are just my observations, my concern. Like I said, I go back to, for me, I like the idea of having parameters, having guidelines, having this is not our typical use of space for transitional housing like this, whether it be in a hotel area, something that's zoned for a hotel, or in an RM50 or wherever that is. And I think setting those boundaries and those parameters, I think, are all important. But given that it's a temporary use, and it's a very temporary use with the pandemic, I personally, I am not as comfortable with the very limited designation of RM50. But there, as I said earlier, there are many good things in here that I think are important, and I think they're needed, because what we've seen in Bloomington and in some other areas is that absent that, there are problems. And we want this to be successful for property owners. We want this to be successful for people who are living in this temporary housing. We want this to be successful for either other businesses or homes or whatever it is adjacent to these uses. Because as we know, it's not just about homelessness. It's often an intersection of homelessness with perhaps addiction, homelessness perhaps with mental health, or other types of intersecting things. So it's not just one situation that people are facing.
Thank you, Commissioner Roman. Commissioner Cook, then.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I too appreciate the clarifications from staff on that, and I see the intent of trying to transition to a use that's future housing in an RM50 district. I appreciate the intent there. My problem is the practical transition of that happening really puts an onus on the developer of an applicant or developer to redevelop. I'm not even sure that's the same applicant. To the type of applicant that's going to apply to do a temporary housing during a pandemic is probably not the same applicant that wants to develop a high density set of, whether it be market rate or some sort of mixed market rate, RM50 type of a housing project. And so I don't even know if that's the same applicant. And so I think we're putting an onus of redevelopment on an applicant that wants to put up this type of housing, and I have a hard time supporting that.
Thank you, Commissioner Cookton. A bit to your point on this, and just thinking about the idea of this redevelopment, and I think as Planning Commission members, we've seen plenty of these redevelopments come through over the years, and I don't think I've heard of one that says we put this together in the last 2 months or the last 30 days. They take quite a substantial amount of time. And so much to your comment, Commissioner Cookton, is I think you're not going to get the application, the practical application of this ordinance as we propose it, or as it's proposed. And then I started to think a little bit more about, as an interim use permit, certainly the conditions are there, and would be reviewed as an acceptable place for people to live for 2 years. So I'm not sure that we need the RM50 designation on top of that to say that this is an appropriate place for people to call home. So I guess that's some more of my thoughts. Anybody else with comments?
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
I think that it could be argued that the property, is potentially already ripe for redevelopment, and the IUP is a mechanism to perpetuate its current use while redevelopment plans are finalized. And I don't think that staff is looking at this as the applicant for the IUP and the eventual property owner developer are necessarily the same party. So very much in a scenario that I'm thinking about, you could have a government actor who would provide a response housing situation, and then a nonprofit developer that they would coordinate with over the course of their 2-year period would come in and would be appropriate to provide that long-term housing and potential further conversion.
Okay, thank you. Any additional comments from commission members at this point? I will, maybe I can start this off. I think there's been a lot of discussion on this, but, and I certainly do appreciate staff's work on this. I think it was a well thought out response. However, I think the practical implementation of this is really effectively says that we are open for business, but we're not. And I think in the pandemic and the issues, the economic downturn, and all the other elements that come with that really require the city to think about how we take care of fellow human beings in the near term in a way that's responsive to them. I think that this current, as it's written, doesn't do that as well as I believe other options that commissioners have talked about. And so as it's written, I can't support this ordinance amendment. Any other commission members? Commissioner Roman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I find myself in the same position, and I won't repeat the things that I've shared already. I think the thrust of those are clear. Again, supportive of the concept, but not this implementation.
Thank you. Any other commission members? Commissioner Goldsman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I would agree with Commissioner Roman as well to your comments. One of my concerns is just timing. We are in the middle of a pandemic, and I know that there are a lot of our community members that need housing, and so although I don't support the application in front of us, I don't want us to lose steam or lose time, especially as we're getting into the colder months. So I would just implore the city staff to come back with to us with a few revisions that we potentially could discuss again and approve. So overall, I can't support this as it's written as well.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Goldsman. Any other commission members? Otherwise, I know Megan Rogers, I understand you would like another opportunity, but let me get to the other commission members first. Any other commission members that would like to speak to this? Okay, the floor is yours, Megan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could staff please get some feedback on what specifically, what I'm hearing from staff, I should say, what I'm hearing from the commission is that you would like to see something that's broader, that applies to more districts throughout the city. Would that be a correct interpretation of the sort of consensus of the Planning Commission?
Commissioner Roman, go ahead.
Thanks. Yes, Ms. Rogers, I think that's accurate. I think for me, I would like to see something where we have the parameters and the guidelines and the boundaries that are proposed here, but that can be applied in other areas without forcing a permanent change. And if that means that the interim use is shorter, I would be open to that. Maybe the interim use is 6 months. So again, if it is a hotel that wishes to continue doing business as a hotel in the future, but I think having all of that whole host of boundaries, I speak for myself, I think that would make that, in addition to what is proposed here as the RM50, which then perhaps would have a longer IUP time horizon. For me, that would feel more in the spirit of addressing the most immediate need, but then also fitting in with the longer term need of the city.
I'm seeing some other nods in that general direction. I would add to that, I think one of the things from at least my perspective is that we have potential areas that are underutilized now that could be utilized. However, that doesn't mean, and so that's opening up those uses. To your point, it doesn't, maybe the conditions are there, much like we saw in the interim use permit, but maybe there's incentives for future re-guiding for RM50 or something like that.
Or perhaps if, sorry, Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
If there was something that's not a permanent rezoning or re-guiding, then it would have to be perhaps tied to, I don't know if the city's still under declared state of emergency for the pandemic or not, but it may have to be tied to something like a declaration of emergency or something.
Does that give you enough?
Yes, Mr. Chair, and to fully usurp Mr. Merksgaard's authority, I apologize, Mr. Merksgaard, for inserting myself in this meeting. But I'm wondering if that, based upon the feedback that the Planning Commission has provided tonight, it would be helpful for us to separate this recommendation into two separate groups. So the IUP, for staff to go back and do some work on making changes to that in conjunction with the feedback we've received, but to ask the Planning Commission to move forward with the definitional changes to the ordinance this evening.
All right, Mr. Merksgaard, thoughts on crafting resolutions with that? Because I think to that point, I did not hear anybody speak against some of the ordinance definitions as we discussed. It was really more about the IUP. Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, a couple of ways I think you could handle this tonight. One way would be to move the ordinance forward with a strong recommendation to add additional zoning districts beyond RM50. And then it would move on to the council Monday night. It's scheduled for a public hearing November 9th. I suppose your other alternative would be to continue the item for additional discussion. And it sounds like the big item of discussion would be whether or not to add those additional districts. But we're hearing broad consensus on the definitions, on having the penalty language. And I'd look back to Ms. Rogers on whether or not you could pull out a portion of the ordinance and let the remainder move forward.
Ms. Rogers?
I would leave it to the discretion of the commission in terms of how you would like to work with that.
All right, thank you. Go on. Oh, I thought you had something else. All right, commission members. So I think we heard kind of maybe two potential areas there. We could recommend the ordinance as proposed with strong recommendation of adding additional zoning districts. However, that does kind of leave open the interpretation without you guys seeing that, but it does address kind of a speedy response. And I think certainly our discussion will be presented to the city council, so they will hear what we have discussed. The other option is, as you may have heard, is to continue this and then direct staff to work on that language in itself and bring it back so that we may hear it again. So Commissioner Cookton, you have some thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My thought is to not push this forward, and with the strong recommendation, I think there's been enough concern from a lot of different commissioners here that I think we, at least speaking for myself, I'd like to see it again instead of leaving it to go forward.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Cookton. Commissioner Roman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think along the lines of what Commissioner Cookton said, I would prefer not to move the IUP piece of it. And staff can tell me if I'm wrong here. In looking at the materials, it does appear that the definitions and those types of changes appear in Chapter 19, but that the new use and the new parameters around pandemic housing appear in Chapter 21. So I don't just put a thumbtack in that now, but if that is true, if that assessment is accurate, I could see us, at least I could see me advancing Chapter 19 tonight and continuing Chapter 21, date certain to perhaps our next meeting, if that makes sense for people.
Megan, can you respond to that?
Yes, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission, we absolutely can separate the definitions that have been proposed to you this evening and move those forward, and then hold the temporary pandemic response facility and associated IUP from consideration by the City Council.
Thank you. Commissioner Goldsman.
Just wanted to ask, if we continue this item, when is the next meeting that we would see this? And then what would the impact be to the City Council meetings? I'm just looking from a timeline perspective, how that continuation would be impacted.
Sure, Mr. Markegard or?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, your next Planning Commission meeting is November 19th. If it were to track to November 19th, it could potentially be December 7th to the council, the earliest date.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Do we, I guess there's one way to think about this moving forward. So maybe we could get a verbal on if there's a support for Commissioner Roman separating the two chapters, his proposal. Thoughts from commissioners? Go ahead, Commissioner Goldsman.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I guess I'd be more of a favor of keeping them together, just from a logistical perspective, and having an understanding of one and how it relates to the other. I also look at the Chapter 19, and if we were separating it from 21, does it really make a big change other than cleaning up some of the definitions? So I've been more of a favor of keeping them together. The time frame that Mr. Markegard laid out of the 19th and the 7th seems appropriate. And I'm afraid if we separate them out, they might lose context. So that's just my 2 cents. I prefer to keep them together and continue the item to the 19th of November.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Goldsman. Commissioner Cookton, it looks like you're agreeing with that.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
All right. Well, at this point, then I would look for a recommendation from one of the Planning Commission members to make a motion. Commissioner Roman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to continue this item to the November 19th Planning Commission meeting.
All right. We have a motion to continue the public hearing for the ordinance for temporary pandemic housing. Is there a second? Commissioner Goldsman?
Second.
All right. We have a motion and a second to continue the public hearing. All those in favor say aye by roll call. Commissioner Goldsman?
Aye.
Commissioner Corman?
Aye.
Commissioner Roman?
Aye.
Commissioner Abdi?
Aye.
Commissioner Cookton?
Aye.
And aye for myself. All right. Just to clarify, Mr. Markegard, do we have enough information to guide staff? Just want to make sure we're all clear on this.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know, I'll invite any other staff if you have anything that you want to clarify.
So just to recap, so the main thrust here is to explore adding other districts or addressing some of the other concerns that you brought up here tonight.
So I just speak to adding additional districts, and I think with the idea that while there is an immediate need in those districts, that not all have to be re-guided to that RM50. Okay, seeing nods, looks like we're in alignment on that. And so that, again, that item will be continued until the November 19th regular meeting. And that concludes the November 5th, 2020 Planning Commission meeting. Thank you all.